Hello. What conception of God is necessary to benefit from the way of beauty? Do we have to know God fully, or do we have to have a totally accurate picture of God in order to benefit? Now, this question is probably more relevant to atheists and agnostics wondering if they can benefit from the process than it is for believing Christians. A Christian would likely take belief in God for granted and wouldn't worry about settling the exact nature of God at this point. They probably thought deeply about it already and are happy with what they have. And that's fine. Some people, however, come to this as non-believers. I would have called myself an atheist when I started, yet I was able to go through the process and to benefit from it. If you've read my book, you'll have read my account of that. So, how did David, my mentor, open that door? What he said to me is that I only had to be willing to believe that God might exist and then take actions consistent with that belief. In effect, I started doing Christian things. The way of beauty process is essentially Christian. It's based on a Christian understanding of God. And I was praying and meditating according to the daily and weekly routine, which we've described, and practicing things that come from Christian tradition. But crucially for me at that point, I didn't have to believe that it was specifically Christ that I was praying to, or accept the full Christian explanation as to how or why it worked, an explanation that I would now accept. What did I have to believe in? A God who had the power to transform me was important. I had to believe that God had that power, something beyond human power, because we're talking about transformation through grace. And it had to be a God who is interested in helping me and loves me. So this is a personal God and not, as we've been discussing elsewhere, some inanimate power that I harness. God is someone with whom I can have a personal relationship. True, I can't see him, I can't hear him or perceive him with my senses, but I treat him as I would a person because the gifts and changes that come to me come through his love, and a person loves. So he loves me, and I do my best to love him. In essence, God gave me a version of David, not God. David, my mentor, gave me a version of Pascal's wager. Pascal is the 17th century French philosopher and mathematician who argued in his wager that it makes sense purely on an argument based in probability that it makes sense to act as though God exists. Because he said, you will have a better life if you do. If God doesn't exist, you've lost nothing and gained a better life. If he does exist, you will gain eternal life as well. If you don't act this way, you don't act as though God exists, you lose both the chance of a good life here and eternal life afterwards. So being willing to believe meant acting as though he exists. I didn't have great conviction, but I was willing. And David joked to me, he said, follow the daily routine for 30 days. And if you don't like it, we'll return your misery with interest. In other words, try it and see if it works. And if you like it, just keep doing it. This was the basic minimum picture of God that I held initially. He's a power greater than human power. He has a power greater than human power that can change me, that he loves me and wants to help me. And he's someone with whom I can have a personal relationship. I may struggle to understand, to picture exactly how a God could be like that. Any more detail is a complete mystery to me, but those aspects are true of him. So this is not the full picture of the Christian God. It's not yet the Trinity, three persons in one God. It was just this essential core. So for atheists or agnostics coming in, you may not call yourself a believer at this point, but if you're willing to act as if God exists, this God that I've described, or willing to act as though he does, if you wish you could believe, in other words, that is sufficient. And if you really don't want to believe and aren't prepared to do anything consistent with this belief, then of course you don't have to do any of it. But probably this process won't work for you. We trial and error, we can see, but I think if you're willing enough to do it, you probably have sufficient faith. This is consistent with another of Pascal's sayings, in which he imagines a quote from Jesus, and he says, "Console yourself, you would not be seeking me if you had not already found me." In other words, what we're saying is that in some way we've found God and he's prompting our desire to know him even more. So it's fine to have a diminished understanding of God at this point. What would be diminished from the point of view of, say, a Christian? Nobody, not even fervent believers, understand or grasp God perfectly. We all have a diminished grasp of who he is to some degree. But however minimal it is at this beginning stage, as long as what we believe is consistent with reality, we can build on it over time. And this gives us the best chance of a meaningful faith in the long term. So the basic minimum, again, is someone is a God, I'm talking about a God here, who is not human, who has the power to bring about the changes we're asking for, supernatural change, who wants to help us because he loves us, and with whom we can, therefore, have a personal relationship. Something else that should be pointed out is that this is not a natural process. As I said before, it's supernatural. This means that if we reject the idea of such a God, it is much less likely to work. We need to be open to the supernatural. We are not changed merely by human wisdom or reason. This is not a psychological process, although human wisdom and reason certainly are contained within it, I think, I hope, and they play a part. But we are transformed by God's grace when we open ourselves up to a relationship with him. And the primary goal of this is to establish that relationship.